to meet you, and the wind be on your back. May the sun shine warm upon you, and the rain fall gently down.
Hello, welcome back. Today we're at week 45 of the series that will cover days 301 to 307. Or if you have the edition of the Road Rising that follows the calendar, then you'd be looking at October 26th to November 1st. One thing we see all through the Bible is the importance of a person's name. Isn't it interesting how a lot of the characters in Scripture have names that suit their personality or their role? In some cases, they seem to have been given that name at birth, maybe a case of divine inspiration. Methuselah, for example, whose name means man of the dart. We might call him Arrow Man. But if you take that name and transliterate it, that is, sound out the individual parts that make up the name, it takes on a distinct meaning. It says, when he dies, judgment. I believe it's no accident that Methuselah is known as the longest living person in the world. 969 years. Neither is it a coincidence that, according to the record, Methuselah died in the year of Noah's flood. Maybe even in the flood, we don't know. There's a sermon in that, but I'll leave you to work it out. Some people are given new names to fit their new identities. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. The Apostle Simon was given a new name by Jesus, Peter, the Rock. In the story, we see a young man who is in the process of being reborn. And it seems only right that he should have a new name to mark the occasion. Let me read for you from the journal entry for October 28th, day 303. With our footwear tightened up, our backpacks well balanced and fully adjusted, Gary and I continued up the trail today. We spoke of the journey as we walked, and I noticed with surprise that I felt better. I still grieved for my son, but having the responsibility for helping this young man get started meant that there was not much time left in the day for dwelling on it. "Why do people call you friend?" he asked as we stopped for a rest. "Don't you have a real name?" I laughed at that. Yes, I do have a real name, and maybe someday I'll tell you what it is. But I haven't been known by that name since I started this trip. It's like I became a new person when I started walking. People get to know me, and then they give me a name that seemed to fit what I had become. I'd like to think that friend describes who I am even better than the name on my birth certificate. He thought about that a while and then said, "Well, I'd like a new name too. Back home, I'm Gary, the tough guy. Gary, the sneak. Gary, the going nowhere. Ever since we prayed together, well, I feel like a new person. I don't want to be the old Gary ever again." He picked up a rock and tossed it off the trail. So how about it? Would you give me a new name?" "You really amaze me. You know that?" I said. "What you've just told me is right out of the Bible. And yet you haven't even had a chance to read it yet. The Bible tells us that when we become a Christian, our old life is put to death. And what's more, a lot of people back then did change their names to fit their new lives. I'd be honored to find a new name for you, but I'll have to give it some prayerful consideration." "In the meantime," I said, getting up and putting on my backpack, "how about talks too much and can't keep up with an old man?" "Very funny," he said, getting into his own gear. "Let's see who can keep up with who, shall we?" John 1:41. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We found the Messiah, that is, the Christ." And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which when translated is Peter. In a lot of cultures around the world today, names carry a very significant meaning, particularly, I believe, among Asian cultures, not so much perhaps among Westerners. If I were to ask you, "What's your name?" would your answer be simply the handle you go by? Or would it include something about yourself as a person? Nicknames are often a way we acknowledge who we are and what we do. Here in Australia, I don't have to ask what my friend Sparky does for a living. Back home there as a kid, I was often called Tex, a clue to my roots. How much more so then should our name say something about our faith? It was common practice back in Taiwan, where my parents served as missionaries, for a person to come to them and say, "I've become a Christian, and I want my name to reflect that. Could you suggest one?" Now, I'm not saying you need to run out and change the name on your driver's license, but I would urge you to spend some time thinking about how people see you. Do they look at you and immediately think, "Christian?" If not, how might you encourage that impression? Talk with your friends this week. See what ideas present themselves. And whatever your name is, y'all come back now. Here? What I want to say today may be painful for some to hear. The topic is unequally yoked, and it refers to a couple who don't share the same faith. You remember, of course, that friend made the decision to begin this journey in spite of the fact that his own family couldn't understand it. And that fact caused him constant pain.